This is Luther Propst, and it's May 23rd, and this is the interview. Okay. All right. Now, I sent you my questions, so you got an idea of sort of what I want to talk about, and I think I want to start with a kind of story. You've been at this a really long time, you know, since I think I was here when you first came.
Almost
such
20
a long
years.
time ago, yeah. And the Sonoran Institute, my friend Frank Gregg, we were just getting started at that point. And so kind of reflecting back just on this border area, and I know now the Sonoran Institute is involved in all other kinds of stuff.
Right.
And how do you think this has unfolded? What kind of story do you tell yourself about this? Is it a success story?
About the border work?
Yeah.
Well, you know, we have been around for almost 20 years now.
Right.
And from the very beginning, because of Wendy, you know, Wendy came out from World Wildlife Fund and worked as a volunteer for the first 6 months. The cross-border work has been an integral part of our work for the whole time. The work that we do across the border has changed, and we've done different experiments. Some I think are great successes, and some have not been that. You know, some have been less so.
Talk about those successes and not so much.
The most successful work that we've done is in the delta of the Colorado River, and in fact, because it has been successful. Well, that's been the biggest success. The other big success has been the cross-border work in the Santa Cruz River. It's interesting that both of the projects that we're still doing after this long have been river-related, shared watersheds. We started on a couple of other projects, and because of funding, probably the biggest reason is funding, the lack of funding. Personnel turnovers, the inability to just get a spark going. We've had other projects that have just petered out. We tried to initiate a project in the Rio Sonora with Joaquin Murrieta, and we just never found the funding, frankly. We did a lot of work for a long time in the western Sonoran Desert. Around Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, the Pinacati. That was particularly what Wendy worked on. That's been successful in that we produced a real conservation outcome, and most importantly, the work led to the establishment of the International Sonoran Desert Alliance, which 20 years later is doing great work.
Yes, it is.
Tracy Taft is fantastic. Now that's gone off in directions that we hadn't earlier anticipated, but that's great. To me, that's a sign of success.
Right, I do too.
Is that it's followed its own path, and so with Tracy doing such a great job with ISDA, a Sonoran Institute staff person is on the board of ISDA. We continue to help them a little bit, but they're pretty much freestanding, self-sustaining, following their own path. I mean, very much so. And we're not really doing any work in that region now, simply because with the economy 4 years ago, with the difficulties in Mexico, we decided we had to go deep instead of wide. And we were toying with the idea of doing more work in the upper Gulf of California, working on development patterns in the upper Gulf. And I would love to do that. And if we had the funding, we would do that, but we don't. So we're focusing all of our resources on restoration of the Delta. Now, that is still a huge project, much bigger than one group the size of us could accomplish. But we are. But what I like about the project is. There's really two things I like about it a lot. One is it is a very important region.
Yes.
It's probably the most degraded non-urban area in Western North America. If you look at what it was 100 years ago and what it is now, it's a very rich area ecologically, or very rich potentially ecologically. So it's got huge resources. And then the second thing I really like about it is that what we're doing there is kind of the full suite of conservation and community development tools that I think are necessary for success, whether you're the Sonoran Institute or whether you're any other group.
want to talk a little bit about that full suite stuff?
Yeah.
I think it's a nice narrative.
I think it's important. Our work has been well grounded in science. So we understand the hydrological conditions, the biological resources, what the birds need, what the water resources need. So well grounded in science, as well as an understanding of the legal framework surrounding water and such. Two, we have a major effort on understanding the economic implications of the ecological decline and the opportunities, and we do a lot of community work. Bringing school kids out to do cleanup projects. So lots of economics and community engagement as well. So science, economics. Three, on-the-ground restoration is the backbone of what we do there. Just small projects demonstrating what can happen if you put a little water and a lot of what's the word? Shoe leather, I guess, or what is it called? Elbow grease. That's what I'm looking for, right? A little bit of water and a lot of elbow grease can make a big difference. And then fourth, building on that community engagement, that scientific understanding, those on-the-ground projects, a policy effort. We've worked with Pro Natura to create a water trust. We've secured money to buy water. We've drafted a minute that will eventually get passed that allows water from the U.S. to come into Mexico for conservation purposes. So it's the full kind of conveyor belt of how conservation best works. And we're securing water both on Mexico's side of the border and laying the foundation for securing water on the U.S. side of the border.
Okay, well, I've obviously spent some time with the website, and
okay, good.
2 weeks ago, Margaret Wilder gave a presentation when I was over in Irvine on all this, so I know a little bit about the trust and how it's doing. Is there any sort of last minute, more recent stuff that I would...
No. I mean, the Water Trust has now got... I have to check with Francisco or with Oswald or someone.
But it doesn't have to be exact.
Yeah, 4,000 or 5,000 acre-feet of water already secured. We've secured a fantastic stream of water from the new wastewater treatment plant in Mexicali, Las Arenitas, for the Rio Hardy. The goal is to get 45,000 or 50,000 acre-feet a year in Mexico. And then we need a surge on the U.S. side. So, and that's some great partnerships.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask about.
That's the issue there. So nothing in the last few weeks.
Okay. Talk to me a little about the partnerships that have gone into this and what facilitates those partnerships in a time when relations with Mexico are not terrific, nor are our concerns with environment. This is not a great time on the border. I think you might agree.
I do agree. I had dinner Thursday night with the director of tourism for Mexicali, and I've got his name. Eloy is his first name, and I'm drawing a blank on his last name. But he points out that the drug wars are having a terrible impact. That there's a real serious issue with the drug wars, and then that's multiplied by media coverage, which creates a sense that if you cross the border and you're going to get your head cut off.
Exactly.
So there's that, but it's almost like there's two completely different universes. These two parallel universes. There's what you read in the newspaper about the drug wars. There's the drop-off in tourism because of the economy. There's the misguided efforts like SB 1070 here in Arizona. Yeah. And the vilification by political interests in the U.S. of Mexico and Mexicans. But then there's just a whole nother universe that it's almost as if they don't intersect each other. Two ships passing in the night of people that are friends with one another, that understand the nuances, that spend a lot of time going back and forth, the first set of activities make it harder on the second set of activities, but only in an indirect way.
That's beautiful. That's really helpful. What keeps this other universe going? What is the
good universe or the bad universe?
The good
You know, the bad universe, right?
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting to me is, and you'll be able to answer this question. I can't, but my impression is that all across the border, there's strong relationships and interactions north and south. And it's all because of shared resources and shared responsibilities. But there's not anywhere near as much interaction and relationships east to west. So for example, we work in the Rio Santa Cruz. We're not working there on both sides of the border just because we think it's cool to do so. We do it because the river goes on both sides of the border. And the Colorado is a classic example. But on the other hand, we're not doing anything like with the people in the Delta, looking at comparing that to the Rio Bravo and the Rio Grande or to New Mexico. I think the main reason is that you've got people on both sides of the border that care about a particular resource, whether it's the wetlands over there at south of San Diego and right on the border. What is that? The Ensenada wetlands, or whether it's the Colorado River, or whether it's the shared pronghorn habitat in the Cabeza and the Pinacades, or whether it's the Santa Cruz or the San Pedro. It's because of the resources. And so then what you've got is people on both sides of the border, because Americans don't realize that there's a lot of people in Mexico that deeply care about conservation of the environment and so forth. And so you've got people on both sides. You've got people that care about a shared resource, and they just happen to be on different sides of a border. It's really no different than working on a shared resource where it's shared between Wyoming and Colorado. People work together because
they care about the resource.
Because the boundaries require you to do so, and the boundaries are kind of irrelevant. So I think that's what really motivates it. We don't work with people in Mexico because we for any reason other than it's the same as working with people in Nevada or New Mexico or Utah. You just work with them because you're all shared. You cared about the same place, and you're sharing work.
When you talk about care about the same place, when I was talking to Ezekiel Escura, he kept talking about his feeling about the Pinacate. This unlovable but passionate place which he just had fallen for.
I agree
and never
with
could
him,
get out of his blood. And I think maybe there are other resources like that. I remember Sherry Sauce. She was in my class years ago, and it was her beginning that Friends of the
Friends of the Santa Cruz.
That was a class project that she had in the class.
I didn't realize that.
But at that time, she's still doing it. And it's a kind of commitment to the resource. So the physical thing itself and the shared feeling people have.
I think that's the case because everybody that I know that sticks with this stick with it because of their love of the place. And it's not like somebody's just bouncing from Texas to New Mexico to Arizona. It's because of a particular place. And that's the same with the Austins, in the southeastern corner of Arizona and northern Sonora. It's the fact that you care about a place, and it just happens to have an international border running through it.
And on the business of then what makes a good networker here, since people are in it for good, and this other universe comes and goes. There's good times and bad times in the other universe, but this alternate view of reality, which has to do with these particular places.
Is closer to the ground, quieter.
Exactly. Closer to the ground, quieter, and maybe persistent, determined.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say, because the border does make it harder. The language barriers are real. The physical border, just getting back and forth, is real. I mean, our staff we've got a half a dozen stories of egregious cases of being of having difficulties just crossing back and forth. And so it makes it more difficult. And then just it does take longer to understand the nuances when you've got even if you speak both languages, there's nuances in just how meetings are run and all that. That's more distinctive than the difference in Colorado and Wyoming, for example. But I also think the barriers and the difficulties make people more dedicated to seeing progress through.
Okay.
There's a certain kind of righteous indignation about a lot of this stuff. Like yesterday, Friday, coming back through Los Algodones. Normal day at the border, you kill an hour sitting there waiting to get across, and it just pisses you off.
Right.
Total
waste of time.
Total waste of an hour, right, for no purpose whatsoever. Just so we got out of our car, the guy just kind of does this perfunctory sniffing around, and then you drive away. It's just it just doesn't help the cause. And then of course the border wall and all that stuff.
Yes. All right, then. We're talking about then relationship built around specific resources. So we've got these geographic places.
And shared values, I think, is the
good,
key.
That's the other thing.
Right. Yeah, it's the resource, and then it's just shared values.
And by values, just elaborate a little bit.
A commitment to conservation and restoration, a commitment to doing so in a way that's inclusive of both sides of the border. One of the things that you sometimes run into and you find irritating is when the water managers from states come to the big water meetings and they say, well, the Delta, that's Mexico's problem. Let them fix it out of the 1.5 million acre feet. And to people that are working to protect and restore it, that is an unacceptable approach because it's not Mexico's problem. It's the Delta's problem, and it's our whole society's problem.
Well,
it's not only Mexico's problem.
Right. But it's the Colorado River.
Right. Exactly. It's everybody that. It's the river's problem, or
they might feel a little bit differently if it were Colorado.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But the point is, we're all responsible for it, and just to kind of sit there and say, "Well, it's not my problem," doesn't solve it. So the shared values around people that can kind of see beyond the international boundaries, can see beyond the mistakes that were made in the past, and can put forth a vision for what we can do in the future.
All right. Well, then let me talk to you a little bit about subgroups. We've got these resources, and that pulls people together, and a certain set of shared values across the border, and among them across these things. But we talked about there not being a lot of a carryover from one of these geographic areas to another.
Yeah.
But there's also...
And that's just my experience.
Right.
There's some people that kind of float across the top of a lot of them, but I don't see anywhere near as much as that as I do people that are focused on one place. Or more, maybe more than one place, but that are focused on the place.
Right. There may be groups like water groups. And it's my impression that they may be more entrenched and conflictual.
The water managers?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. And, I don't fault them because, well, there's two thoughts on that. One is some of the water managers, particularly in the upper basin, these are guys, and when I say guys, I mean...
They're mainly guys.
They're mainly guys, right? And they've got a job and they get a paycheck to protect, Colorado's interests in their share of the river.
Right.
And, they're just doing their
job. It's an old game. I began writing about it in the 50s.
Yeah, exactly, right. And, that's just their job. On the other side of the coin, some of those folks, led by Pat Mulroy, are doing, I think, very admirable work at beginning to think outside the box.
Right.
We do a lot of work with Southern Nevada Water Authority. Sometimes they're not happy with us. We just did a paper that's unrelated to the border. We did it with a couple progressive groups in Las Vegas that just said we don't like the pipeline, and we got to figure out something other than building that pipeline up to the Snake River up in Utah. But in the Delta, we're great allies. They're looking for ways to get the water that they need, and I don't fault Southern Nevada at all for that. People in Las Vegas, all of us that care about the Delta, and I'm digressing a little bit, but all of us that care about the Delta know that we're never going to restore the Delta as long as people in San Diego or Los Angeles or Las Vegas are short of water. It's just not going to happen. As soon as their taps don't produce water, it's our problem.
Right.
And that's true all over the world. So we know we got to deal with those issues, and I kind of admire the fact that I want them to do conservation in Vegas, but they're being progressive about how to secure water, and the work they're doing, they're investing in restoration, investing in lining canals and things of that sort, so they can wheel the water back up.
Right.
But that's pretty good in my opinion.
Right.
So some of them are are thinking more holistically about all this.
Okay, well, let's put the water people over to the
put them
side.
in their own
Let's
category.
Let's put them over here. How about ecotourism, culture, fisheries, wildlife? Are there other just sort of beyond this sort of one place at a time? Are there other kind of what you'd call networks so that people generally know one another? Oddly enough, as I've asked this question, a group has come up that I didn't even think about, and that turns out to be border riders, who may not even talk to each other very much, but to read each other's stuff.
Yeah, now that's interesting. Yeah,
and they have common visions. They reference one another. I was talking to Bill Broyles about this, and he reads other people. And,
I hadn't thought of that much either, but that's absolutely right.
And we all sort of get our shared vision often from these people who write a lot.
Chuck Bowden's done so much on that. Yeah.
Right.
Border riders, and it's interesting because you think of the networks that are kind of sectoral and then cross-sector.
Right.
So, academics have long cooperated, but what's neat is we're seeing more academics that are engaging more with the NGO community.
You are seeing more of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just
Give me
had
examples.
Just when I was in Mexico, in Mexicali last week, I had dinner with Jorge Ramirez, who's a hydrologist at the University of Baja in Mexicali. And we're contracting with him and his students to do some modeling for us.
Great.
His credibility, we couldn't buy his credibility anywhere else. Carl Flessa at the U of A. Carl's doing fantastic work in the estuary now.
Yeah.
And in fact, Carl arranged for Francisco Zamora. Francisco was, and you need to talk to Francisco.
Yes, I think so too. He's on the list.
Yeah, he's great. And
do you have a contact number for him, or just call the office?
290-0828. Or I can give you his cell number. But,
it doesn't matter. I was told maybe Wendy might be able to talk to him at the end of the week.
Give me just a second.
Okay.
Carl arranged for him. His mobile is 520-668-1838.
Great.
And Francisco's much more knowledgeable about all this than I am. But at one point, it was a year or two ago, Francisco spent 4 months working half-time at the U of A on a grant from Plessa doing some of the science stuff. And that gave Francisco a chance to get out of the office, to put his head down and concentrate on getting some numbers crunched and so forth. And so, I'd say at the U of A, at UNISOM on some of the broader issues, at Mexicali, there's several other universities where the academics are deeply engaged in the NGO work and vice versa.
Bill Shaw is another example.
Bill Shaw's a great example, right? Yep. And Ezekiel's a great example.
Great example,
right? Yep. And so that works.
Do you think this is happening more often?
I think so. I think it's more often now than it was 10 years ago. But that's anecdotal purely. But that's just my experience.
Okay. Well, that's.
And what I like is the fact that, and my impression might be wrong, but I feel like that you're just as likely to find the right professor on either side of the border. And I think that's encouraging. Particularly groundwater modeling in the Delta, you got to have somebody from a university in Baja, not in Arizona or California. You don't have to, but it sure works better.
Okay, so we've got writers and academics.
Professors, NGOs.
NGOs. Talk a little bit about NGO networks.
Well, our work, and I can talk about our work firsthand,
Right,
obviously,
exactly.
but our work is our relationship with Pro Natura is absolutely essential. I mean, it is like that relationship is core. Without that, none of us would be anywhere. The problem is that in the NGO world, there's big divides among different types of groups.
Right.
We cooperate very well with Pro Natura, with ARAC, which is the Association of Ecological Users of the Rio Hardy in Rio, Colorado.
Right. Yes, I think I've seen that.
Yep, you've seen that, which we helped create and we helped fund. And it's a local group based in along the Rio Hardy.
And the ISDA you mentioned.
Yep, we also cooperate very effectively with like Sustainable Northwest, the Alejandro Robles' group. And then there's other conservation groups, mostly U.S. based, and I'm not blaming
Right,
them or blaming us,
no.
but the relationships are not as easy. There's groups, and don't get me in trouble, please.
No, I'm not. I won't quote anything that
okay,
you're
good.
Right. I'm not going to quote people
Okay.
other than generic.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Center for Biological Diversity.
Right. You're not the first person who said this, incidentally, about the Center for Biological Diversity. I give money to them, and part of it is that they have a very active profile.
They have a very active profile, right?
They're accomplishing.
Well, they get a lot of media. They're very good at media.
They're very good at media.
In some cases, I think their kind of gunslinger approach works. With a lot of stuff, it doesn't work. And right now and also a lot of that's just personalities. Back when Michael Finkelstein ran CBD, we got along great. Michael would call me, I would call him, and we'd run things by each other. With other staff, it doesn't work. There's just not as much coordination. And so, it's a little bit like I dealt with that first with Greenpeace, where sometimes what they do, wading in and throwing bombs or filing lawsuits, works.
It's really helpful.
Other times it's not, and with the border issue, it's difficult.
Do you think part of it is that some of the people who are personnel in these agencies don't have this long-term committed background?
I think that's a lot of it.
To place.
Yes.
Because they are staff people who come in for particular
They
things.
come and go, and it's also a worldview, and I can see it. Young, angry people at CBD that are just, well, screw Bureau of Reclamation. We don't want the human desalting plant running at all, and so we're going to sue them.
Right.
It's like, whoa, let's just slow down. Let's think it through a little bit. And
the Bureau of Reclamation's been there before anybody. It's going to be
there a lot longer, right? And I guess my point is, it would be great to have the kind of relationship that we have with some other groups where you call them and say, hey, you know what, it's time for a lawsuit.
Right.
Instead of this, just kind of like, you can just see they're almost like having young people that read the paper, and then they just kind of say, oh, we can wade into that and file a lawsuit.
Right.
And sometimes it's okay, sometimes not. But I just, there's groups like Earth Justice that are quite strategic when they file a lawsuit. And when they file it, that they've got a good chance to win, that it's going to be, it's going to work, and others that just file lawsuits, And not to be cynical about any of it, because I admire the total impact at times is necessary, but sometimes it'd be helpful if they were just more collaborative about that, and they knew the region better.
Right. Well, it may be the nature of the NGO game, especially if they're national and not necessarily tied to place. It may be some sort of institutional and organizational imperatives as well as the kind of personnel.
Right, like EDF works in the Delta.
Yeah.
And our relationship there, frankly, is kind of mixed.
Well, that's what Ezekiel mentioned, EDF, as doing some things that were not, some things for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that's... And, part of that is like, they've got a person who's very active in the Delta, Jennifer Pitt. I think Jennifer's great. But then she reports up, and then you get into people that are doing things for the wrong reasons, whether they're being driven by, very, very rich, very, kind of micromanaging funders, and that's a huge problem for all of us. That's another big challenge in the Delta, is just the relationship between the NGOs and the funders.
Well, talk to me a bit about that, because nobody else will be able to. I was going to go to government agencies, but I'll come back to that in a minute.
Funders, generally speaking, the relationship between the NGO community and the funders, I think, is, and I'm biting the hand that feeds me. So
Well, I'll be very, very careful. In fact, if anything that I'm going to talk
I trust
about,
you, right?
but I will pass it by
Good.
you. Anything that's even could be traced back to you.
Increasingly, the relationship between NGOs and funders is like a consultant. And, they've got their program, their agenda, and you just kind of do their bidding. And that's good. You appreciate the funds, but you've got people calling the shots that aren't as close to the situation as others. And, it's the golden rule.
Right. We're talking about foundations here.
Yeah, I'm talking about the big foundations.
Right.
Some foundations are much, much, much better than others. Mar Isla Foundation, very good. They just support you annually. They want to know what you're doing. They ask you tough questions, but they let you decide. Other foundations, probably the worst is the Walton Family Foundation. Walton can be very dictatorial about, here's what we're going to do, and they don't want to listen to you because, they're the big money.
Right.
And they tell you exactly what they're going to do. Now, that's mixed. They've got some program officers that are great, but Sam Walton, the family member that's interested in this part of the world, Sam knows best in the Central world.
Right.
And that's a huge challenge. And so that changes the dynamic. And the problem there is that you wind up with people calling the shots that are not invested in either the resource or the relationships.
Right.
And so that's a big problem, and that's interesting because it influences all the dynamics and everything. And
other thing is that it relates to this larger true narrative things, because on the one hand we have this one universe, on the other we've got a persistent, cooperative, collaborative underbelly to all this that persists year after year. And if funders come and go, which
they do, they lose interest and so forth. But what it means is that those of us that are trying to stick with something a long time, just have to kind of catch every train as it goes by, because a lot of the funders usually, a lot of them last 3 or 4 years, and for something like restoring the Delta, it's not sexy. It's not like buying land. So many foundations want to see that you buy a big piece of land and so forth. Delta's a lot harder to explain. I don't even try to explain it to people without giving them a 3-day tour down there. I just took a potential funder down for 2.5 days, and at the end it's like, now I kind of begin to get it a little bit. But the stuff that's nuanced, that's complicated, that buying water's hard.
Yes.
You buy land, you own it. You have a title to it. You have title insurance. Buying water, you might own something if it snows in Colorado next winter, but you might not too.
Okay, well I was going to go to government, but I'm not going to. I'm instead, because you talked about taking people to tours on the Delta. As I looked at your website, more and more of it has to do with people having experiences with nature. More and more, not ecotourism, that's too trite a phrase, but this business, Sato's doing it too. Sort of introducing people to the Delta. Tell me what you're doing.
We started a group 10 years ago, La Ruta de Sonora.
Okay.
That was about ecotourism. And we had a staffer, and for a couple years it was breaking even. We had a couple $100,000 a year budget. And we did trips. You could sign up and take a tour we had 3 trips that were offered, one in the Delta, one in the Pinacates, and one that was more of a cultural trip, kind of a mission thing. We shut down La Ruta, I'd have to check, but I think probably 2008.
Okay.
And the reason we shut it down was that we were losing money.
Right.
The drug wars, the economy.
Okay.
The fear of Mexico.
Okay.
And the fact that most tourism in Mexico is, college kids and ATV guys going to Peñasco.
It's not what you'd hope.
No. And so for a while that worked out really nicely, and it was generating revenue. And, we used money from La Ruta to buy canoes for the Ejido down in the Cienega de Santa Clara. That was great. We could have just written them a check for the canoes, but it was all kind of a set aside from the revenues, and we just couldn't afford to do it. The other part is it's hard for nonprofits to run successful businesses. We're not good at it.
Right.
And a couple other people started doing similar kind of things, but mostly tourism just it just turned off. Now what came out of it is that we really learned how to do trips, and so now we do a lot of trips, and they have been very effective for decision makers.
Okay.
We took the board of, what is it, the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. We've taken all kind of conservation leaders down. We took the board of the Aldo Leopold Foundation down, and now they're doing a 50-minute film on Leopold, and about 5 minutes are going to be about the Delta.
Wow.
And that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Did Leopold know anything about the Delta?
Read the Green Lagoons.
Oh,
he took a hunting trip down there in the 20s and wrote a little essay. It's in the St. County Almanac.
I'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great little essay, and it makes you cry, though, when you see what he saw and what we see today. And so we'll often, when we take a trip down, we'll often go down to about where people think he was. It's a little bit like Shea in Bolivia, or like Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid. There's a lot of places, but we know about where he was. Actually pretty close, because he identified a few places. And it was a jungle. And now it's got the same conservation values as that tile floor.
It's really upsetting.
But in any case, we've taken lots of people down from water agencies, and that makes a big difference for people to get down and see it on the ground. So what's missing is kind of the economic return for the locals. But we take people down, and we introduce them to people like Colleen Soto from the Quapaw Nation. We go down to we meet with all the local folks. Big thing, I'm digressing now, the biggest thing from the recent tour is the earthquake, which had a huge impact.
Yeah, I've forgotten about it even.
People forgot about it, but like the little village there, the Cienega de Santa Clara, has been destroyed, and the people are now living in tents outside of town. So, big hardship there. But in any case, taking people, and now we know how to do the tours, just the logistics and the hotel relationships and all that. And so a big part of our program is taking funders, taking water managers, taking media interests down into the Delta and give them a sense of what's going on. Often an overflight. Lighthawk and EcoFlight are both good about giving us flyovers and stuff. And so that's how you expand that network, because you just can't get it without going down there, and you can't do it in a day. You got to stay 2 nights to get any feel of it. It's a vast area, and a lot of little microclimates and everything, and you just got to kind of get a sense of how the pieces fit together.
Talk to me a little bit about intergovernmental networks. I'm going to talk to a lot of people like Bob Verity, who spend a lot of time at that.
Yeah.
And there's some people spend a lot of time establishing reserves and fostering collaboration among agencies on different sides of the border, and among federal and state and local agencies, park people. This reserve idea that from 93
the whole
on.
Biosphere Reserve idea, right? Man in the Biosphere program.
Right.
That's also very important. The Bush administration made it very difficult. They prohibited these guys from traveling south of the border in a lot of cases. I think one of the things that really helps. The problem with the government side is, at least for the public land managers, is the rate of turnover.
Right.
And none of the border parks or border assignments are kind of capstone assignments where people might stay.
Yeah.
People come 3 or 4 years, punch the clock and move on. Howard Ness is somebody you should talk to.
Yeah, is Howard still around?
Howard's retired, but I believe he's still living in Las Cruces.
Is he? Well, I can go to Las Cruces, and I can certainly call him over there.
Yeah. The number I have for him is 505 649 7758.
Great. That's wonderful.
Or also try his home, which is 505-233-3102.
That's great.
If you can't find him, give me a call and give me his email. But Howard, Howard has his detractors.
Not Gwynn.
Good, because I agree with Gwynn. Howard, I thought Howard did a great job. Howard had that rare ability of feds to navigate right on the edge, of going too far.
Right.
So he filled out his forms and followed the rules, but he was great at building networks. I don't even think they have that same program now. I think that program got, when Howard retired, I think they retired the program with him, the International Relations Program, or the U.S. It was under the U.S. National Park Service International Affairs Office, and it was the Border Affairs Program. And they did close it down, and they absorbed it back into Washington or something.
Right.
So now I don't know who it is.
Yeah.
If it's somebody, they're wasting their paycheck on them, because I've never, since Howard left, there's nobody doing anything that I'm aware of.
Right.
And that's true of BLM, Parks, Fish and Wildlife Service. The folks come and go too fast, but that's an important part of the network. And there's always certain people like Howard. In his own way, Harold Smith was great at that.
Right.
That were willing to risk and that would go across the border. The shooting of the young ranger had a hugely negative. What a tragedy.
Yeah.
But beyond the personal, the big tragedy was it just caused. It further reinforced the militarization of the border.
Yeah, right.
And especially under Bush, relationships were actively discouraged and militarization was encouraged.
So in some sense, these government agencies are, despite all the talk about institutionalization and getting laws and institutions on your side, in that sense.
It's all about people.
It's still about people.
Right.
And
because right now I don't see much happening.
Yeah.
Bush killed it, and with Obama, I haven't seen it as a priority necessarily.
Right.
But in defense of Obama, it's they're just getting people in place. It's and partly it's because the Republicans have made the border such a toxic issue that anything that happens is that kind of informal, off the clock kind of stuff.
All right. Well, then going back to your larger narrative, where we began at the beginning up here, the good times and the bad times. You wouldn't put as the big stars in the crown the establishment necessarily of these reserves. You would instead sort of point to these places like the Santa Cruz, like what you're doing in the Colorado.
Yeah.
What would you say are the...
Well, it's both.
Okay.
The Santa Cruz is so below the radar screen.
No, it never quite below the radar screen for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but for the broader society, right? That's how we all operate. But so I'm torn about that. So many conservation advocates here in Tucson are so keen on the Santa Cruz National Heritage Area.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah.
And we've endorsed that. My endorsement was lukewarm. I don't oppose that. It's okay. I support it. I don't think it's much of the answer. I think the real answer is just one little place at a time. You should take a look at this report we did on the health of the Santa Cruz, and the second annual is coming out soon. I'll send it to you.
Will you?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me make a note.
In fact,
give me your card.
I'm going to do that right now.
We've done a report. We were so happy that we got the first assessment done before the new wastewater treatment plant improvements. And now the second one is going to show that, yes, it makes a difference to do tertiary treatment. So we're excited about that. So the heritage area, again, I don't oppose it. I support it, but I'm not convinced it's going to make that much difference. I'm convinced that with the Santa Cruz especially, it's just a whole lot of little things. It's the expansion of Tumacacre, great success. It's buying conservation easements. It's the work that Lorinda Oswald, who owns 3 miles of the river, is doing just to do, restoration kind of stuff. It's back and forth with kids. As the 800-pound gorilla in the room is Nogales, and so you can piece it together. But the Santa Cruz is more about, if I were a funder, instead of supporting creation of a national heritage area, I would support creation of a much stronger Friends of the Santa Cruz.
Okay.
Just a strong constituency for it, because it's easements in the San Rafael Valley.
Right.
But now State Parks has that, and State Parks is totally mismanaging.
Right.
It's a crime what they're doing. And then in Mexico, it's working with these individual villages. Then it's figuring out some kind of water policy in Nogales. If I had the funding right now, I would hire a full-time person in Nogales, Sonora, to work just the water policy issues and decisions there.
Which is really heating up.
Yeah, and it's only going to, obviously it's only going to get worse.
I wonder if I can extrapolate this a little bit. When you read Chester's book, and it's the only thing available that's in every library, you get the feeling that the failure of the International Biosphere Reserve was a failure, which I think is part of what we'd like to sort of change that message.
And Chester, he comes around and all, and I've heard him speak, and he's a friend. And
he tries, I've reviewed the book, so I mean, it's.
But I think he's just misguided.
Yeah.
I think he's just wrong. So the Santa Cruz National Heritage Area, that's one side of the border. The Biosphere Reserve, the designation of the Upper Gulf Biosphere Reserve in Mexico has had a huge impact. Okay.
But that's the Mexican government.
Impact. Yes. Jose Campoy, the guy that runs it, he's got his detractors. He's buckled down on fishing, but they've got, when I was talking with Jose a year or so ago, he told me they've got an assignment of 15 Mexican Marines in a battalion, a platoon or whatever, who enforce the fishing rules. That's a big deal.
It is.
The Quapa are unhappy about that, but that's something they do have to work out. But in the because the prohibition applies to everybody, and the Quapa, I think, rightly stand up and say, well, we've been fishing here for 10,000 years, 5,000 or 1,000 or whatever the number is, and you should let us do a certain amount. But as you know, the problem in Mexico is they don't really recognize indigenous peoples. But the fishery would be nowhere without that management. So I think that that's a huge success in Mexico. And they've built visitor centers. They're building a new one in San Felipe that we're helping them with. Ecotourism, real management, real coordinated science. I think it's great. I think the fact that we didn't get that international designation is regrettable, but just no big deal. It's just not that, it was kind of a stretch anyway. And some folks, Bill Broyles is one, bless his heart. Bill's great, but Bill takes great stock in designations.
Yes, he does.
And I'm not sure that that's always important. In fact, Bill is fantastic, but we disagreed about that Sonoran Desert National Park idea, which I stand by. I think Bill was totally misguided on that.
Yeah.
I've
been reading Dry Borders, and I keep thinking his real contribution may be, in fact, this writing, the fact that he brings these people together, and that he really is dedicated to the place. He really cares about it. He writes beautifully about it.
Yep. Same with Gary Napham in the same vein.
Well, I interviewed Gary.
But Gary appreciates the networks more than Bill does.
In fact, Bill refused to call himself a networker. It sounded political to him, and he didn't like the idea that there is this person who pulls together a variety of different things. And I suppose that might be an advantage of the Sonoran Institute, because it's local, but it stands above this enough that it does have connections.
Well, we try to. I mean, that's right. But Bill got real engaged around the designation of the Sonoran Desert National Park, and then when he didn't get that, he left. And I thought that was regrettable, because he could have had a huge impact without the designation. And frankly, Helen, the designation's a bad idea. I don't want a national park that's also a bombing range.
Right.
What I want is a few more BLM rangers.
Right.
And that's just. Also, it was a complete pie in the sky. The Secretary of the Interior is never going to take one of the largest wildlife refuges and take it from one agency and give it to another. You know agency behavior.
Right.
What kind of secretary is going to do that?
Right.
And so.
And he says that the main thing is that these people talk to one another and do some joint.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
So I wish that we could have convinced Bill that just the designation of the Biosphere Reserve in '93 in Mexico was a huge success. And now if you can have a formal relationship, great. If you can't because of Don Young, just get it where the guys can go back and forth and talk and coordinate and all that stuff.
Right.
The problem is that if we'd had that Biosphere Reserve, we still, the international one, we still wouldn't
have the same problem.
We wouldn't have stopped the wall. And the wall's the problem for the pronghorn. A problem for the pronghorn. So, yeah, there's different ways of looking at it, and but I've long ago gotten over the idea that just designating something is going to protect it. It helps in a lot of cases, but it's also
it may help.
It may help, exactly right. And the thing is, in the dry part of the desert out there, we've got the designations already. You got the Cabeza Prieta, you got the Goldwater, which is despite the bombing that goes on, got a lot of really pristine land.
Right.
And what you really need is some more BLM rangers, and maybe a bit more caution on the part of the military. But they do a pretty good job. They keep the ATVs out. They pound certain places to what is it? One of the guys said we bombed it enough where it's now diamonds. That just so much heat and so much, but a lot of it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And who you ought to talk to is Fred Peace.
Okay, he's not on my list.
Fred is a retired colonel in the Air Force, and he was the point person for the Air Force on a lot of the range stuff going out here 10 years ago. Bill knows him quite well.
Okay.
But Fred has just reappeared as the Secretary of Defense's liaison to the Department of Interior. And Fred has been poking around out here for 15 or 20 years. He knows all the folks on the U.S. side. Fred would give you a very interesting perspective.
Terrific.
Yeah.
That's great.
Remind me, and I'll send you his email address or something. But he's done great work in terms of showing the military how their cooperation with others benefits them and all that stuff.
But he fits this pattern, does he not?
Absolutely a networker. In fact, you could interview Fred in person because he's got a place in Tucson. He's got a retirement place up at La Paloma.
It's terrific. That helps a lot.
So he comes out here. He's doing a lot of work these days with the U.S. Institute, with Mark Schaefer and those guys.
I don't know the U.S. Institute.
Oh, it's part of the Udall Center.
Well, it shows how successful I've been.
U.S. Institute for Environment Dispute Resolution.
Oh, okay.
That's what.
Right.
You know those.
Right,
I figured that. Right.
Yeah, they do.
And Kirk Emerson retired, and she's been replaced by a guy named Mark Schaefer.
Okay. And he's doing a lot of stuff on the border?
I don't know whether that's just something that Fred and Mark are doing separately, or you'd have to ask Fred or Mark.
Yeah. Okay, I'll ask him.
Yep.
All right. Sort of the highlights of successes. Did I really, the things you're proudest of? What are they? The Delta?
Well, the Delta, in that now we've got 5,000 acre feet of water being used for conservation. We've restored 300 or 400 acres of tamarisk to, cottonwood, willow, mesquite grove.
Right.
We've got this eco camp in the Delta.
Okay.
Beyond that, I take a lot of pride in having. Well, so the Delta, the establishment of ISDA,
I was going to ask
which is Wendy's, great success, and the fact that ISDA's managed to keep afloat and managed to keep doing great work. What they've done with the Curley School is just like a world
We're going to see it on Saturday.
Fantastic! It is fabulous. So I would say the on-the-ground restoration in the Delta, the community support in the Delta. There's real restoration being done there. ISDA and their continuing work. Okay. I don't think that any of us can take more than just an innocent bystander credit for the Biosphere Reserve designation, but we helped create the environment for that.
Yeah.
And it's hugely successful.
Ezekiel can take a lot of credit.
Ezekiel deserves a lot of credit for that, absolutely. And we did help create the environment where locally it was more supportable. The designation of not only the Upper Gulf Biosphere Reserve, but the Pinacati Biosphere Reserve.
That's right.
And then the conservation easements in the San Rafael Valley. That's very border related. It's something that Sonoran was very involved with. And then the work south of the border, which we ran out of money 3 years ago, but there's still a lot of interest there, along the Santa Cruz section. Okay. And then we shifted our attention to the section of the Santa Cruz between Nogales and the Pima County line. And I'm very excited about that, too, that we've helped build a sense of that the river is important in Santa Cruz County.
Right.
On the ground, the expansion of Tumacacori National Historic Park,
Right.
huge victory, because it went from being just the church to being 2 miles of river.
It's an amazing thing.
It's a huge thing.
Beautiful.
Yep. And Ann, what's her name, deserves a lot of credit for that. Ann Resort, who was the superintendent then. I think it's Ann Resort.
Okay. Would you characterize your attitude about the future of this region as relatively positive, given this trajectory of long-standing people here, or do you think that the problems are just overwhelming?
You know, Carlos Nagel, you know Carlos.
You know, Carlos doesn't respond. Is he still...
He doesn't respond?
No, I can't find
He
it.
and I trade emails all the time.
Well, give me his email. I can't find it. It's it's not anywhere on the net.
Well, good for him. You know, I'm jealous.
He's on Facebook, but you have to join. Yeah.
Oh, CLOSFREE@gmail.com.
Okay.
Now, he's moved around a lot lately. He's had some tough blows as well.
Has he not been well?
No, he's just broke.
Oh.
He's just broke.
Well, he got this business, and but you got to have activity to have.
Yeah, and he used to interpret. He was one of the best interpreters,
right.
but his hearing's not as good now, so he's doing translations.
In fact, he would often switch in the middle because
he was so good at
he was really good.
Yeah. And so he's, we try to help him with a little translating here and there. And he's had several projects, but he's so bad about getting involved in something and then not getting paid. And
right. Well, that's not been his driving interest.
Exactly. So, but you should talk to Carlos as well.
I will now do that again.
Carlos taught me that I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. You just plug along.
Okay.
On one I'm so worried about the big things, climate change.
Right.
I'm so worried about the politicization of immigration and the border, and I don't see that getting better anytime soon. And the Republicans have found an issue that works for them, and so I worry about that. On the other hand, it's a very resilient part of the world. The people and the wildlife and the ecological values. I mean, just that there's anything in the Delta is remarkable. Like as far as the Delta goes, one of the problems we face is people tend to think, kind of people we're trying to sell. Some come along like, well, as long as you've got Los Angeles and you've got Hoover Dam, why bother? You're never going to restore it. And of course we're not going to restore it to what it was before that. But if you completely forget about what it was 100 years ago, and you just think a little bit of water, a lot of great land, and you think about creating, just this kind of a whole new kind of conservation area with just kind of, minimal steps, rungs along the ladder.
Right.
There is a lot you can do, but you forget about what it was 100 years ago, and you think more about, a system of wetlands that are close enough that birds can fly from one to the other.
Right.
And so there you got, some reason to be optimistic.
Right.
But I do worry about the population in the Colorado River Basin, like I said, the immigration issue and the drug wars.
In fact,
probably
these
the best
thirsty
thing.
cities are going to have to get their water.
If the models are right, we're looking at less and less water. It's going to be very hard.
Yes, it is.
I think. We can't just look at things like the wall. We've got to look at things like, one of the best things we can do for this region is legalize marijuana.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And get Mexico, off the brink of being a failed state.
Absolutely.
And this is another digression, but this country is slowly legalizing marijuana.
Well, I'm a legal marijuana user. It works on my irritable bowel syndrome. And it's terrific, It saves my life. So
But what's interesting, I think, is that it's going to start this way. And there's 5 dispensaries in Bozeman. People are going to see the tax revenues. They're going to see that it's no big deal, and it's going to happen one step at a time.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing.
When I can get a prescription for synthetic marijuana from my own general practitioner because I asked for it.
Yeah.
You know, things are happening.
Things are happening. Well, Liz and I own a little place in Durango that we rent out.
I love Durango.
It's a great town. The tenant is a friend of mine. He used to work for Sonoran. He's a friend. And he called and said, and he got run over when he was a kid, and he's had huge issues with one of his legs, and he got addicted to ibuprofen, and the doctor said, you got to quit. And so the doctor gave him a prescription, and the doctor said, well, you can either buy it or grow it. And Jason's kind of a green thumb, so he's growing it in the garage. And he called and said, I need to know, are you cool with me growing marijuana in the garage? And he wanted it in writing,
right.
Which is, I'm glad he called. I'd like to know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's kind of like, we can work something out.
Right.
so I'm totally. I mean, it's
like
ridiculous.
The egg ladies in my lunch bunch. I'm
how can you make a plant illegal?
You can't.
It's just ridiculous. So in any case, moving. But so I'm optimistic with our universe, with all of what we're doing. There's bigger issues that I just don't know. The wall is such a bad problem, but on the other hand, in 20 years that wall is going to be the biggest transfer of building materials from one country to another since the Marshall Plan, because it's already happening. I was talking to a guy that used to own Lukeville, and he died recently.
Oh, he did.
Al Gay.
Gwynn asked me about him.
He died in January, January 1st. His wife still owns it, and but I haven't talked to her recently. But Al passed away. Al was a great guy, weird, hard to, but Al took me out and showed me where they built those vehicle barriers. Where not long after they built them, the Mexican cartels came along. The barriers were kind of like this, and they came along on the south side and sawed the base with the concrete saw, lowered it, came up with a way of just sawing it so they could lower it. Think about the Batman movies. You know how the gate would plop down and the Batmobile would go over and come back up? That's what they'd done. They'd rigged it up so it would go down. They'd drive over it, hauling tires behind the vehicles, and then put it back up with these kind of hinges that you could only see from the south side of the border. And
amazing.
Yeah. And now Terry Goddard was giving a talk the other night saying that now they've come up with these kind of movable cranes. So so we built the 20-foot wall. They've built 22-foot cranes that at night on a new moon drive up to the border, lift the stuff over so it's not being caught by the sensors. The cranes go out far enough that it's outside of the sensor zone and lower bales of marijuana onto the back of a truck with these huge cranes. You know what? Let's get real. And Terry's point is, forget about the wall. It's about law enforcement.
Right.
And sophisticated law enforcement.
Right.
And
against certain people and not just everybody.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Well, I've taken enough.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.